If you're like me and you want to perennialize your food production in your garden with more native food sources, this video is for you. Specifically, I'll be diving into some seeds that you can sow in the fall that will add in some more herbaceous elements to your food forest that are also edible and food sources. I think food forests are so cool in that they perennialize a food system that comes back year after year. But I think that a lot of the food forest advice and a lot of the plants that are pushed are not native. With the increasingly more difficult growing conditions and droughts, I am starting to prioritize more native plants in hopes that it makes my garden more resilient. And I think that native plants will make my garden more resilient because they'll provide pollinators with food and habitat that'll help make sure that my plants actually set fruit. And they'll also be more adapted to grow in my environment. So should drought hit, for example, my native plants will likely be able to handle that better. Lastly, I think it's worthwhile to note that they'll help support native plant restoration in my area, which is pretty good for the environment. Because many native plants require a seed stratification period, which means they need to be exposed to cold, moist periods like winter before they'll germinate, it's important that you're planting these in the fall. So here are the plants that I'm planting this fall to add to my herbaceous layer of the food forest that'll make sure that I've got a lot of food that is native to my area growing. The first native that I'm growing is matting onion. Every single part of this plant is edible. You can eat the bulbs, leaves, and flowers either raw or cooked. And when foraging, you will need to be careful that you're not harvesting poisoning lookalikes, but if you're growing this in your garden from seed, then you don't have to worry about it, and you can be sure that it's safe to eat. It's hardy from zone 3 to 9 and expands slowly and readily via bulb offsets in the ground and via self-seeding, so you'll get more and more every single year. I'm also growing wild garlic, not to be confused with field garlic. This plant makes for a lovely leek, garlic, or scallion substitute and is obviously native. It goes dormant in the summer heat, but will come back in early spring and bloom into July and spreads via bulbets grown on top of the plant, kind of like walking onion. So it's a wonderful native alternative to walking onion, or obviously you could plant it alongside walking onion. A note on wild garlic or Allium canadense is first, do not confuse it with Allium venale, which is the non-native version. And second, be mindful of whether or not it's considered a noxious weed in your state, and or if it's an agricultural nuisance, and if that is something that you personally care about. Now you'll notice the first two herbaceous plants that I'm starting from seed in the fall are alliums. I'm choosing to plant a heavy amount of native alliums so that obviously I have them as food, but also because they're great pest deterrents and wildlife deterrents, especially for my fruit trees and bushes. So I'm going heavy on the alliums. But the next few perennials are not alliums. The next one that I'll mention is Maximilian sunflowers. I do not see this talked about ever, but it is similar to the commonly promoted sunchoke or Jerusalem artichoke that is native and heavily promoted in permaculture spheres. However, Maximilian sunflowers are a lot less aggressive. So they're a lot more well-behaved in the ground, which is why I personally grow my sunchokes in pots and my Maximilian sunflowers in the ground. They need a little more sun and a lot less water than Jerusalem artichoke, so they may be more drought resistant. However, their edible roots are smaller than Jerusalem artichokes. So keep that in mind. And they do still have some of those inulin fibers in them that make them a little bit harder to digest. The next plant that I'm starting from seed in the fall is New Jersey tea. Per Everild's description, during the time of the Revolutionary War, the American colonists began making their own tea as a substitute for expensive Chinese or British tea. The leaves of this nitrogen-fixing native shrub, which grew abundantly in New Jersey, could be used to make a beverage much like black tea. Native American women often used the fragrant flowers as soap since they produce a gentle lather and and cleansing agent. The entire plant has also been used in the production of brown, green, and red dyes. Personally, I'll be growing it for the nitrogen fixing qualities, tucking it in next to my fruit producers, and I'll also be adding it in as a tea addition. And finally, the last plant I'll be adding to my food forest and starting from seed this fall are asters. I've already got a bunch of native asters in my garden. The flowers and young leaves are edible and great for salads or for drying in tea. I personally think calico aster is so yummy in tea. There are lots of asters available. Some are more shade tolerant than others, which makes them excellent to tuck into more shady parts of your food forest. And not only are they edible, but they attract a lot of pollinators. Mine are absolutely overwhelmed by bees in the late summer and fall. So those are the native plants that I'm starting that are edible and are food sources in my food forest. If you are working on adding more native food plants to your food forest, I'd love to hear what you're adding to your food forest for more resiliency. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up. If you want more content like this, hit the subscribe button. And this is Zone 6B Gardening signing off.